Neil and Jenny came out of the curtain, and Cheetah and Rusty went in. They would be the voices for part 2. But of course Brian stayed in there, because he had to work the puppets. Geraldo played us a tune on his harmonica, and we were ready for part 2.
All at once, two puppets popped out of the curtain. One was a magician with a top hat, a black cloak, big mustache, and a sword. The other was lady whose head came out of an end of a box and whose feet came out of the other end. This was the conversation. Played by Cheetah.
Are you going to saw me in half?
Played by Rusty.
That's my job. Besides, I have nothing better to do today.
Couldn't you wait until I tell you a story?
It better be a good one.
Alright, once upon a time, before there were people, and before there was even a world, there was just a steady rain everywhere.
That's a lot of raindrops.
Well, they weren't exactly raindrops. They were candies.
Candies, how sweet. What sort of candies were they?
All sorts. Jawbreakers and peppermint sticks, and chocolate-covered raisins and lollipops. Just about every kind you could imagine, and then some.
Were they different sizes?
Yes, and all different shapes too. They weren't just round or flat. They had all sorts of little hooks and angles so that, as they fell, they kept getting tangled up with one another.
Very sticky, if you ask me.
Pretty soon, there were big masses of falling candies. They smashed up everything in their paths, and they fell and fell and fell.
Didn't they ever stop falling?
Yes, after a very long time. They slowed down, and then they stopped altogether. The big ones turned into earth. The ones that had fallen fastest turned into water, and became rivers and oceans. And the ones that broke up into candy dust floated off, and became the sky.
Oh, so that explains why the world is so full of different colors, reds and purples and greens and golds, because those were the colors of the candies. But what about people? When did they arrive?
At first, there were only parts of people.
Like someone had shaken up a box full of gingerbread man?
Right, there were feet and legs and ears and nose and fingers and shoulders. All of them just sort of wandering around, trying to find one another.
You mean arms and legs wandered alone? I find that hard to believe.
I didn't ask you to believe. All I asked you to do was listen. Anyhow, that's what happened in my story. Fingers looked for hands, toes looked for feet, tongues looked for mouths, and ears looked for heads.
And what happened when people finally got themselves together?
They weren't happy by themselves, so they formed families, and the families formed tribes, and the tribes turned into nations.
You don't say!
Yes, I do. And the people began to talk to one another. But first, they had to invent words. They gave names to things, like mountain and tree. And they gave names to people, like John and Mary.
Very clever. Who would have thought to call mountains mountains? But go on with your story. Did everyone live happily ever after?
No, not at all. The words were very unhappy, just as the separate arms and ears and nose had been unhappy. The nouns wanted to verbs to go with, and the verbs wanted to nouns.
I understand perfectly. The words dogs and barks thought they were made for each other, and the same with the words ducks and quack.
Yes, and pretty soon, 4 sentences of words came to be grouped together.
How touching! So that's how people started to talk.
Yes, and after they had been talking for a long time, they began thinking.
Is that the end of your story?
Yes, but would you like to hear?
That won't be necessary. Thank you.
Begins to sew madly, sews through box. Lady steps out of box completely unharmed. She and magician hold up their hands and bow to the audience. Then they bring out their banner. End of Act 2.